Hi, and welcome to Thursday Comics. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and Fantastic Four Grand Design. Today we're talking about Journey into Mystery 99. We're getting close to the big issue 100, and this issue has a pretty phenomenal Kirby cover. It's not his most like in-your-face, dynamic kind of cover, but I love how offbeat it is. I love the depth of field. It almost looks like you're looking at, two panels of a comic, but it's actually, the way that it's all one complete drawing, and you have a lot going on. You have Thor banging his hammer and turning into Don Blake, and then through the doorway you can see Mister Hyde smashing through the wall. This is the premiere of Mister Hyde. The previous issue had the premiere of Cobra. Now we're getting Mister Hyde, and I had never read any of these old issues, these ones where it's like all done. Heck, I had read sort of the later issues that Kirby worked on where it's Mister Hyde and the Cobra, teamed up together, them as a duo. Because Kirby drew the cover, I'm going to assume that Kirby created or co-created Mister Hyde. That seemed to be, a big function Kirby played there, was sort of coming up with. Stan wanted Jack Kirby to draw as many comics as possible, and by extension, co-write as many comics as possible. And then the ones Kirby couldn't draw, he wanted him to at least come up with a springboard in the form of a cover. And so that's what we have here. The mighty Thor meets the most dramatic super foe of the year, the mysterious Mister Hyde. It is time for mighty Thor to become weak Dr. Blake again. I hope no new menace shows up now, for I'd be helpless to fight it. Mister Hyde, stronger than a dozen men, more dangerous than any mere mortal. Also, you will meet Surtur the Fire Demon in this issue's Tales of Asgard. The Tales of Asgard stories alone are worth the price of admission. So we get to the story. It's the credits read, written by Stan Lee, illustrated by Don Heck, lettered by Art Simic. Thor is in a crowd. He hurls his hammer, flies away. I like this composition, how it's kind of broken up into three parts. The people over here, the buildings over here, Thor over here. It's interesting. I like it. We have a nice little crowd scene. And lurking in some pretty deep shadows are Mister Hyde. I have to say, this so far is my favorite issue that wasn't drawn by Kirby. The drawing that Joe Sinnott did in earlier issues is beautiful drawing, very nice drawing. And the drawing Don Heck is doing here is also quite beautiful, but it's also got a little more storytelling, a little more atmosphere, a little more interest as the story unfolds. Stan Lee, by this point, has a pretty solid grasp of the Marvel formula that he and Jack Kirby pioneered, and is applying that here. This feels like a Marvel comic, more so than any of the other non-Kirby issues of Thor so far. This feels like a real Marvel comic in terms of storytelling, and it's not the best Marvel comic ever. It's not the worst Marvel comic ever, but it's unlike a lot of those earlier issues where they just, they seemed just, brand echt, for lack of a better phrase. We get the continuing soap opera, another element of that Marvel formula, and Thor is again pleading with his father, to allow him to marry Jane Foster, and Odin's having none of it. We have Mister Hyde skulking, and then we have this sort of flashback to his origin. Again, it's a retcon, it's a flashback to something that's actually happening here for the first time. And we see that his real name is Calvin Zabo, which I hadn't known. I just knew him as Mister Hyde from some early, Jack Kirby Thor comics where he teams up with the Cobra. And he's Calvin Zabo, and he applies for a job working for Don Blake. Don Blake has heard about his bad reputation and refuses to give him a job, and that creates the grudge that he holds, that makes him swear revenge on Don Blake. He decided to follow in the footsteps of the imaginary Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and try to reproduce that formula that was created in the book, and try to recreate it in real life. And he's successful. Kind of a cool transformation sequence. He becomes Mister Hyde, playing off of the classics. Stan and Jack, were playing off the classics when they came up with the Hulk, kind of a combination of Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it was, sort of building off of a previous story they'd done called The Monster at Midnight. And so it's like, let's replicate that here. And so he becomes Mr. Hyde, and he realizes he can sort of act with impunity because this transformation that gave him, bulk and superpowers and changed the shape of his face, changed the shape of his body, also changed the shape of his fingerprints. So he can commit crimes with impunity, and there'd be no evidence to indict Calvin Zabo. So now we're back at Asgard. The argument between Thor and Odin continues, and Thor gets so upset he kind of raises his hammer in a threatening way, not even thinking about it, just kind of getting caught up in it. But that's, what? You dare raise your hammer to me? And Odin is having none of it. That is a big no-no. Thor immediately begs forgiveness, and Odin says, get out of my sight, come back to me later, and maybe I'll listen to you, but you need to go cool off. So Thor flies away. He does some more of the gymnastics that we saw in a previous issue that don't feel quite right, don't kind of fit with Thor the way we see him, when Kirby returns to the series. That those kind of acrobatics are reserved for other super characters, and that Thor is, just a little more of a powerhouse. That he doesn't have as much finesse. He's more, sort of brute strength. And speaking of brute strength, Mr. Hyde comes here looking for Don Blake, looking for revenge. We have a reiteration. So this is reiterating the smash through the wall on the cover, and then here's reiterating that sort of double image of Thor and Don Blake. Just when Thor is needed, Thor turns into Don Blake. He doesn't realize it, and before he has a chance to turn back, he gets knocked out of the window by Mr. Hyde and falls. This long extended fall. Cliffhanger stuff, the sort of thing we'd see in maybe like a Daredevil comic or whatever. He's falling, and he realizes he can tap, if he can only get close enough to the building, he could tap his stick against it, and turns into Thor, flies back, does his hammer helicopter, tells Jane Foster that he saw Don Blake falling out of the window, rescued him, and then came to help. Mr. Hyde continues his rampage, realizes that Thor foiled his attempt to kill Don Blake, and so now Thor's his enemy too, not realizing that the two of them are the same person. The story kind of changes gears, and all of a sudden Thor is robbing banks, and we're not sure why. I mean, I assume Mr. Hyde has something to do with it, but we're not exactly told. So now in these last 2 pages, this new status quo is set up where the city is being held hostage. Thor is on a rampage, and everybody's scared. There's this feeling of paranoia. It's they say knocking the regular news off the newspapers. Stories of revolutions and strife in other countries get knocked off of the front pages in favor of stories about Thor on a rampage. The police are doing heavy patrols. The people are only leaving their homes and apartments, for important business, and otherwise the streets are becoming empty because there's just this overwhelming specter of a renegade Thor. We'll find out more about it next issue. So we got another sort of cliffhanger, another 2-parter, and that this story will be resolved in Journey into Mystery number 100, the big anniversary issue. The way it changes gears is kind of abrupt. I would have liked to see a battle between Thor and Mr. Hyde, where maybe Mr. Hyde gets the upper hand and Thor has to regroup or something. But, it's offbeat. It's not following, the standard operating procedures. And these are good things. These are things that the Marvel comics were doing at the time, sort of shaking things up, and maybe you make a false note here or there, but at least you're trying something different. So shaking things up. So I like this. I like what's happening with the series. It's Don Heck is no Kirby. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. Even Don Heck himself. It's not a Kirby comic, but it's not bad. It's doing its thing. better than average disposable entertainment from the early 60s. Now we get to the main event, the Tales of Asgard story, the thing that is better than average, the thing that is one for the ages. And so let's check that out in this Tales of Asgard format. So here it is, and it's a real beauty. The story of Surtur the Fire Demon. And we have Odin, fast becoming my favorite sword and sorcery character, kind of, rereading these Tales of Asgard. It's like, he's like a Conan or something, just these great sword and sorcery adventures. He's got a great costume, great swagger, and he's coming into the land of the trolls and kicking ass. Presented with pride by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And I love this gimmick, and they explain that the trolls, they live underground, and they have these mechanisms where they can, make the rocks kind of like lift up and then go back down so they can, sort of spy on things. And Odin's there, and he's not messing around. Odin presses on, even though the Troll King threatens him with death if he does not leave the Forbidden Land. And then the trolls attack heroic Odin. Odin, whose power is the only force in the universe that can shatter the unbreakable grip of a deadly troll. I mean, this is a fantastic, fabulous comic. This is high adventure, high fantasy, operatic grandeur and adventure that you just wouldn't see anywhere else at this time. You couldn't see it at the movies, you couldn't see it on TV, and you certainly couldn't see it in other comics. And sort of, it's hearkening back to, the silent era of film, Siegfried and the Dragon and that kind of stuff. Those movies are awesome, but it's, with color and just, Kirby's whole storytelling sense and his design sense, it's just kind of like a new kind of pop spectacle, a new kind of art, and it's just wonderful. I just really love it. Suddenly there is a blinding, searing, nerve-shattering blast, and also, I mean, I'm here for the Kirby. I'm a Kirby fan, but I'm a Stan Lee fan too. Stan is really bringing it here. This is the kind of stuff that really helped him solidify his reputation. He does. He does write, some pretty great captions, and it reminds me of The Who. It's like you got Pete Townsend, you got John Entwistle, and then Roger Daltrey's kind of like the singer. He's not a songwriter, he's not a composer, but he's an amazing vocalist, an amazing interpreter, and I see Stan as kind of like the equivalent there. He in order to hold his own with these powerhouses that he's working with, Keith Moon, John Entwistle, Pete Townsend, he's got to bring some like superstar stuff to his vocals. And that's kind of what Stan's doing here. He's bringing some superstar scripting, some superstar, and Stan Lee he was a frustrated actor, frustrated author, frustrated poet. And, he's bringing his love of poetry and his way with words to these Tales of Asgard segments in a way that you don't really see in his contemporary work, like the work that he's doing at this same time that he's doing these Tales of Asgard stories. Odin is free, for when he plunges his sword into the ground, anchoring it there, he draws unto himself the limitless powers of the gods. Their will to fight crumbles before Odin's show of force, and the trolls tell him where to find Surtur. So Odin ventures forth once more into the sea of flame. And I think I said this before, this kind of stuff is very inspiring to me, and I think you can kind of see the influence that this material had on my own comics work. I've done all kinds of comics, but like I really do have a soft spot for sort of, mythic spectacle, and this is just gorgeous. This would be like, the next time you see visuals like this or scenes like this would be in like, video games of the 80s and 90s. This is like, I could see this as like a boss in like, Legendary Axe or something, this boss that's, made up of, huge pixels, a huge number of sprites, and like, you're running through the level, and then you get to like the big fire pit, and then up rumbles Surtur the Fire Demon. and then the fingers turn into snakes, and you have to fight all the snakes. And so Odin raises his sword and draws frozen meteors from outer space downward, which is a sort of Kirby thing that you see in a lot of comics. You'll see it in more Thor comics, but you'll see it in other comics too. And then even in New Gods, there's like this weapon that draws meteors and asteroids out of orbit and hurls them in the direction of a target. I mean, this is just gorgeous. It reads almost like a storyboard too. Like you feel the flow of this story, and the meteors come down, and Surtur's steaming now from the cold, and he flees, he runs, he digs a hole for himself in the center of the earth beautifully drawn here in sort of mythic terms. Digs a hole, scoops out the center of the earth, throws it into the air, this sort of molten core, and this becomes the moon. Odin wastes no time. He runs down the rainbow bridge from Asgard, directs some kind of gravitic force or some kind of magnetic force into the center of the earth, and gets it spinning so that the centrifugal force will trap Surtur there for all time. Another beautiful, I love these cutaways. And now Odin is triumphant, and as a peace offering, Surtur sends him a winged horse. Now, in the previous issue, Odin was riding on a chariot pulled by 2 winged horses. So it makes me think, like, if I were doing like a Thor grand design or something, I would make this story take place before the previous story, as almost like an origin of how Odin got his first winged horse. And then maybe, hoping to cause Odin to set him free, Surtur sends a gift to the victorious god, a gift which flies through the mouth of a seething volcano. It is a wonderful winged horse, which Odin keeps as the evil Surtur hopes that one day Odin's wrath will be appeased and he'll be freed. Surtur cares not how long it takes. He has all eternity to wait. What a fucking comic. What a fucking story. That's just, it's awesome. And so as, Kirby and Stan are, interpreting these ancient myths and putting them in their own terms, putting them in their own way, retelling them, which is what, one of the elements of myth is that these stories are told and retold, and mean different things to different generations. You can see how, you do enough of these interpretations of old myths, and pretty soon you start creating your own myths from whole cloth, which, Kirby would later do, with New Gods and series like that. So the main stories of these, Thor comics, they're okay. They're getting better. But the Tales of Asgard stuff is just, some all-time great stuff. This is a great comic. This issue that sort of collects a bunch of these Tales of Asgard. I mean, put this up against any comic in your collection. This is great stuff. I'm having a fucking ball here. This is, let's do this again next Thursday.